Right, hello. So this is going to be yet another talk about AI. The good news is, having just seen the schedule, there's a lot more and other talks about AI, and I'm going first. So the rest of you have got to change your slides in response to whatever I'm about to say right now. Anyway, there we go. Cool, let's start here. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay, so I have the artistic capability of a tadpole, and so I decided that this year I would extend my experiments. If you were here when I gave a talk last year, I just started playing with Stable Diffusion, which I got running on my own machine at home, and it did some quite interesting things, but I wanted to understand what a year's worth of progress might look like, and the answer is a year's worth of progress looks like that. That's the prompt. So we used Bing Image Creator, gave it that prompt, picked the second image that it came up with, decided that I wanted it to be widescreen, so I took it from Bing Image Creator. I chucked it into Photoshop 24, which has got its generative image creation tool on top, and asked it to extend it. Yeah, as you're looking at this, it's leftwards, right? So see if you can see the join. And then, because I was doing it on a 4K screen, I asked Photoshop 24 to use its AI to upscale that. And that's what you've got. Excuse me a second. It took me maybe 10 minutes total. Most of that was messing about with the prompt. And also actually getting back into Photoshop because they've upgraded it. They've changed the user interface again. If any of you work with Photoshop, you'll know that that's a regular phenomenon. The artificial intelligence bit's about 2.5 minutes, I reckon. So, yeah, quite a lot of progress in a year. So, another talk about AI, the rate of change, and I hope you find it interesting and informative. But first, a quick intro for those that don't really know me. I know a lot of you do, and where I work. So I work at the IET. We're one of the world's largest engineering institutions. That's an actual picture, not AI generated. I probably should make that point throughout these slides. Actual picture, real. It's just a short walk from here. However, the magic happens up in Stevenage. There's a few people from Stevenage I can see. Of course, these days it happens on Teams as well. Anyway, we're one of the largest engineering institutions, over 160,000 members in 150 countries. We're also the most multidisciplinary to reflect the increasingly diverse nature of engineering in the 21st century. We celebrated our 150th birthday just the other year. And you can see our mission there. We're working to engineer a better world by inspiring, informing, and influencing our members, engineers and technicians, and all those who are touched by or touch the work of engineers. And we're serious about that mission. For example, we're about to head out to COP28. We have observer status there, and we are planning on an announcement or two, so watch that space. Okay, so you just had a little bit of an intro to what I was going to talk about, and I didn't actually write that intro. I got Bing to do it, and yes, I didn't expect to use the word Bing and cutting-edge tech in a talk about technology, but it's a funny old world we live in, eh? So that was the prompt that I used, so I'll give you a moment just to take a look at that. All right. And this is what it came up with. So if you've not played with this stuff, you should, okay? You can add to the prompt, so you can give it indications of style, and tone, and length, and these are the words that it came up with. And yeah, you can see that at the bottom. I emphasized the stuff at the bottom. How does this affect the scholarly publishing industry, which relies on the quality and integrity of academic content? What are the implications, yada, yada, yada. And the reason I emphasize that is because I thought it was really rather good, actually, for a relatively small number of words, certainly to illustrate a point here. Probably saved me 30 minutes, coming up with the text, fettling it, staring at the wall, going to get a cup of coffee, staring at the wall again, writing some more text, dropping it in an email. Now, to be fair, and again, in the spirit of transparency, its final sentence was, anyway, this is what I'll be talking about. But it didn't take more than a moment to get rid of that sentence. It was a pretty good first draft. And anyway, I thought, can we go a little bit further? So I gave exactly the same prompt and a style to the image creator to see what it would come up with this time. So are you ready for that? Here we go. A few things spring to mind when looking at this one. That graphic seems a little familiar. I think I've seen a painting very like it somewhere. Our speaker seems to be seized by some sort of demonic fervour. And I do love, my favourite bit is the little bit of AI-generated product placement down the bottom left corner. But he did get the text right. So there we go. Not content with that, thought we'd have a go at this one, which I'm not sure if I like it more or not. It is definitely very, very surreal. And I'm hoping maybe any of you that are art experts can tell which artist this is a rip-off of. But anyway, I think it's more original than the first example. And I do like the way that it's fiddled with my title, Back the Future. So there we go. Anyway. So I've been trying to figure out, I think like the rest of you, right, what I think about this new technology. And as I read some of the interesting and some of the alarming thinking of the people that have their hands on the controls of this stuff, I kept coming back to something that was said all the way back when. In fact, it was said about 20 years ago. And just to remind you what 20 years ago looked like, that was a world where Google hadn't yet had its IPO and also hadn't removed the first word from its company motto. And yeah, two people, Tim O'Reilly, Dale Doherty, 20 years ago, today, more or less, are sitting there working out what they're going to do for a new conference in Silicon Valley. So it is 20 years since Web 2.0 emerged as a meme. So who remembers, come on, let's get some hands up. Who remembers those heady days? Please don't leave me hanging. All right. I see there's a few of you for whom all of this is history. Lovely. Well, the next slides are for you then. Anyway, God, life moves pretty fast, doesn't it? Ooh. Right, here we are, the classic Web 2.0 meme map. For you young people that weren't around for this, there's a thing called memes and everybody got very excited about them. I've redrawn it because the original was pretty hard to read. I hope this is better. Is that all right? Okay, good. And it was this that I kept coming back to, because right there in the center under user positioning is the phrase, you control your own data. And it turns out that that was a load of bull hockey. Because very shortly after this stuff was being talked about, we had Facebook, and then Google decided to drop the don't from Don't Be Evil. And we've been on a trajectory of global data hoovering and user capture that has accelerated even more in the last decade. But a lot of this has survived. A lot of the core competencies have stood the test of time, even if it turns out they weren't actually interpreted by the gatekeepers of the tech in quite the way we thought they might be back in those heady days of the early noughties. It's definitely a service world. It's definitely a rental world. And increasingly, the idea of an ownership world is one that's a myth for a lot of people. Architecture of participation is a very big thing. If we just change one word, more on that in a moment. And talking about data and transforming it, big tick there. Software above the level of a single device. Hard to imagine a world where that was a thing to consider. And that leads us to the innovative ways in which the Goliaths of the modern world leverage people and their data to lock us in and ensure that they benefit maximally from whatever exchange of services is actually going on. And I think we should refresh our memories on this bit of thinking. And for those of you that don't remember these heady days, maybe you're seeing this for the first time. So this is from John Battelle, who was one of the key people back in 2003 talking about this stuff. I maintain that this article, The Database of Intentions, do go look it up, it's very good, along with Hal Varian's classic economics paper on versioning information goods, are the two key articles you need to understand in order to see how we are where we are today. But I'll read it out. The database of intentions is simply this: the aggregate results of every search ever entered, every result list ever tendered, and every path taken as a result. This information represents in aggregate form a placeholder for the intentions of humankind, a massive database of desires and needs and wants and likes that could be discovered, subpoenaed, archived, tracked, and exploited to all sorts of ends. Such a beast has never before existed in the history of culture, but is almost guaranteed to grow exponentially from this day forward. This artifact can tell us extraordinary things about who we are and what we want as a culture, and it has the potential to be abused in equally extraordinary fashion. This is like a pre-echo, a portent of what we are experiencing now. These databases of intention were and are held by the digital power brokers of the world: Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon. And then, quite recently, some folks came along, used openly available IP from Google and others, leveraged the power of graphics cards from NVIDIA, and just hoovered up the data from the 21st century so far. And somehow, Microsoft seemed to have come out ahead by the cunning application of cache to an emerging company, OpenAI. Foundational AIs are databases of intention. They've ingested in some way everything that existed on the web up until now, the words and the pictures certainly, the information, and they have rendered it into a probability space beyond our ability to comprehend. And in that context, these words, and particularly the last two sentences, stand out, don't they? Let's revisit that meme map with a foundational AI basis applied to it and see what you think. So it turns out, top left, all that tagging, especially all those human security captures and other bits of user-centered participation, were grist for the AI training mill. Users as feedstock in so many ways. I'll talk about small large language models, that's not a contradiction in terms, loosely joined, as well as the large ones in a bit. Emergent behavior. Well, if you spent time playing with these things, you'll have a sense of that. But here's a couple of examples. These I think are really quite mind-blowing. So, if you're trying to give an AI a maths question, okay, they're notorious for getting it wrong. However, if you put the phrase, take it step by step, they improve. If you ask them to respond as if you are an expert in subject area, they transform its ability to give you a better set of responses in that area. And anecdotally, it seems that being polite brings better results as well. And I'm going to expand on that later on. Software that gets better, the more people use it. They learn from us. Now, the idea was that we'd benefit back then, but actually the machines are benefiting more than we are. That's not an AI thing per se. It's been a feature for a decade or more. And then look at the core concepts from back in the day. And let's tweak a word or two. Model as platform. If you've seen what Microsoft are up to, absolutely. And if you haven't, a word of advice, go and find out what they're doing, because they're up to some very, very, very exciting things indeed. They've just bet the farm on their cloud operating system and M365 platforms in terms of AI embedding. Data control. It's been fascinating to see organizations of all sizes suddenly wake up to the fact that something might come along for their data and render their control of their user base useless. The good news is, of course, that in some places there are governmental collaborations that have started to look at protecting their citizens from the abuses in this area. But the desire to architect in participation and architect that in as dependence still runs high. Scalability is a challenge once again. Cost. And actually, I'm wondering if that might be a good thing after the ad funding attention economy tragedy. We've got to think about the carbon footprint of these things as well. But also, information is expensive again. And it's worth thinking about, because maybe disinformation is going to get a little bit more expensive. Remixes. So, as we've just seen, when does a visual riff, the scream, become something that breaches other people's IP rights? And I don't know what you think, but that was really far too close to a version of that famous painting for comfort, I thought. We already have A-list actors being re-rendered without their permission to appear in adverts. And this technology is showing up everywhere. The smallest 5G sensor is a training source and a potential prompt input for these things. And harnessing our collective intelligence? Oh boy, for better or worse, they certainly are. Right, so a quick interlude. So this slide was going to be a riff on the "It was 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the AI to play," and I was getting quite pleased with myself. And then, as I found out with this stuff, when you ever try and write one of these talks, stuff happens faster than your ability to keep up with it. So as I was getting this done, I heard the news that Paul and Ringo and the estates of George and John had used AI to extract John's voice from a demo cassette in the 70s. And here we are in 2023 listening to the final Beatles song, an actual proper Beatles song. I'll leave it to you to decide whether it's any good or not. But the other interesting thing is Peter Blake, who's the 90-year-old artist who actually did the cover for Sgt. Pepper and whose output our AI has cheerfully ingested and used for my benefit in this case. He's just gone and done a performance art installation at the Mandarin Oriental in Hong Kong. And he's actually very excited about the possibility of AI as tools for artists. And if you look here, I do search for this. That's a small picture of it. Basically, he trained an AI with a plotter to do, I don't know what the correct artistic term is, but basically draw portraits of people in his style using one continuous movement. Okay? So that's the thing. So as people attended this, a picture was taken, it went to the AI translated that into his style and drew that piece of artwork in real time as people attended it. And built the thing, and it's quite interesting. If you go and see the bigger picture, it's actually really quite impressive. But the other point I wanted to get to here is that although Tim and Dale and John went exponential with the Web 2.0 concept in 2003, 2004, actually, it's a bit older than that, because the term Web 2.0 was first used by Darcy Denucci. Who knows Darcy Denucci? There we go. I think you made my point. She's an information architect, because she's not dead, by the way. She's got a job out in California and is doing very well. I think she works for Automatic, I think it is. But she was writing about Web 2.0 all the way back in 1999. And she wrote an article entitled Fragmented Future in the magazine Print, which is nominative determinism working there. It only seems to exist as a scanned PDF, unfortunately, so perhaps that's why she's a footnote in this story. Or perhaps there are other reasons. But anyway, her ideas were taken and built upon, remixed, one might say, to fortune and glory. But the thing is, writing all the way back in 1999, she was onto something. So listen to this from 24 years ago. The web we know now, which loads into a browser window and essentially static screenfalls, is only an embryo of the web to come. The first glimmerings of Web 2.0 are beginning to appear, and we are just starting to see how that embryo might develop. The web will be understood not as screenfuls of text and graphics, but as a transport mechanism, the ether through which interactivity happens. It will appear on your computer screen. It'll appear on your TV set, your car dashboard, your cell phone, your handheld game machine, maybe even your microwave oven. The transport mechanism is for information. And I think foundational AIs are a step change in how we process and act upon information. And here's why. So, Sunday, this slide was up to date. And yesterday, this slide is out of date, as I haven't had a chance to put in GPT 4.5 Turbo and GPT 3.5 Turbo, which they just announced yesterday. Anyway, it's striking to see the progress here. So GPT-1 is crude by today's standards. That's the foundational AI that scared its creators so much that they refused to release it widely. 5 years later, we can all go play with GPT-4 on our mobile phones. Just look at the rate of progress. From 12 to 120 layers of neural network. From 768 vector dimensions to 12,288, or maybe more. Machines with hundreds of billions of tunable parameters. And at the moment, we're not hitting any limits in terms of the physical capacity of these things. There's a huge amount of work going on to refine the hardware that these things will run on, and this is just a selection focused on OpenAI. Claude from Anthropic has a context limit, and it's crudely the sum of the input and output words it can work with, and it's got a context limit of 100,000 tokens. Actually, I think GPT 4.5 has just blown past that, 120,000 tokens. I think that's what I heard yesterday. Don't quote me on that, do go look it up, ask an AI. It's a fairly decent sized book that can be held in a contextually sophisticated multi-dimensional memory and inspected, interrogated and manipulated. Llama, the open source LLM model from Meta, is simple to GPT-3 in terms of performance. You can run that on a laptop. To say this has been eagerly seized upon is an understatement. The idea that every word in the English language can be represented by a 12,288 dimensional vector is quite literally beyond human comprehension. So I want to put something to you in terms of how we should think about these things. See, foundational model AIs aren't chatbots. The chatbot is simply a user interface to the information and the capability contained within them. Excuse me. That interface is the first generation control surface for getting them to do things for us. This is a simple diagram of the revolutionary technology of the early 1970s, the general purpose universal microprocessor, or the computer. You give it data and instructions in the form of a program, and the central processing unit could do just about anything in terms of an output. Now, of course, back then, it was quite crude. As a kid, I worked with my dad to land on the moon with a computer because it was Apollo, and that had simple alphanumeric readout for a display. A few years later, and it was a basic ASCII screen with the same program on the ZX81, if any of you remember those. I built that with my dad on the kitchen table, and both myself and the kitchen table had the memorial soldering burns from that activity. And these days, I fly around in space in VR. But I think this is where we might be in terms of the first generation of general purpose AI. They're called foundational model AIs because of their plasticity and adaptability to handle and do productive work with the inputs they are given, without the previously show-stopping burden of heavy-duty retraining. This is how you could suddenly write some words down and the thing will produce art, generate code, go take data from a source and render it into an analysis, translate between languages of all types. And if any of you have seen the demos of these things doing computer language translation, those things are very, very, very impressive indeed. And we can already see hints of where this is going with GPT-4 and its mixture of expert models approach, already simulating, at least conceptually, the way chip design has gone, of specialized subunits working to parse data in order to make sense of it and deliver an increasingly sophisticated output. Now, choosing my words very carefully and don't overinterpret it, I'm not a million miles away from a brain. So, what's a connectome? Well, a connectome is a map. It's actually a map of biology, of wetware. It's a map of the neurons and their connections, and therefore their pathways. And after much work and study, we actually have a true connectome for a small worm-like creature called a nematode. And there's a very crude version for a human brain. It looks very pretty, but it's still got lots of areas labelled "Here be dragons." The point is that you build a connectome by very carefully trying to work out what lights up and what it connects to when you give an organic neural net an input. We literally put volunteers in MRI scanners and ask them to do things whilst not moving. And there's some really, really impressive stuff coming out of that work now. We can see individual words lighting up. We can receive responses to very sophisticated images. Foundational AIs are black boxes. We work out what they are actually doing in response to an input by very carefully working out what lights up and what it connects when we give it a prompt. But what we do know is that these things in some way have encoded language, aka information, aka knowledge, aka a representational state of our understanding of how the universe works, of how we think, of what we consider to be axioms and what our multitudinous opinions are, whatever they may be. Which is why I think that we are discovering that prompting a foundational model to act like an expert, or take a maths problem step by step, or even give a better response to polite language, produces better results, because it's triggering different routes through the network. After all, we accept, or at least the experts do, that essentially the rules for understanding how information encoded by language is contained in the language. It's how we read, it's how we listen. Why shouldn't the softer, more emotional aspects of information be encoded as well? This is the Altair 8800 microprocessor, I didn't build that one, didn't ever use that one. Built using the Intel 8080 chip, which is the second Intel chip that they manufactured. This was the first machine to have Intel inside. This was the start of the desktop computer age. This showed that there wasn't a global market of 5 or 6 mainframe computers, that in fact you could have a computer on every desk. It was 1975. This is the computer that inspired Bill Gates and the computer that inspired Steve Jobs. And I think that in terms of AI, we are here. The first generation general purpose AI, and actually, just as this box begat thousands of variations since lost to computer history, although if you go up to Bletchley Park, actually there's a very wonderful computer history museum up there if you can get into that. Oh, I see someone's been there, nodding away. We're seeing exactly the same explosion of creativity and investigation in the AI space. There are folks looking at what the smallest foundational AI can be, narrowing down the basic capabilities to a specific problem space. Just because GPT-4 has the entire universe inside in some way, shape or form, doesn't mean you need all that info for your class of problem. You don't need to be beholden to one of the big models. Right now, you could go to Hugging Face and choose from thousands of model variants. You can even go append your data to a model and roll your own for a few £100 of training time. Radical remixing is back. If you buy the idea of a general purpose AI, then the idea of architecting specialist AI modules and getting them to work in concert ought to pique your interest, especially in our world. After all, we're in the information business, right? As I mentioned earlier, Microsoft in particular have gone very, very big on this. They once had a big, hairy, audacious goal of a computer on every desk and MS-DOS on every computer. Now they want their co-pilots to be your, and I do mean your, digital assistants. They're very clearly driving to assure that as the means of computing with machines gets abstracted up to just talking to them, that it's their user interfaces and tech that we'll be using. This is what their CEO, Satya Nadella, was advocating just the other week, that the ability to get machines to do this for us should be in everyone's grasp. Yes, he's explicitly talking about abstracting away a large amount of development from people to machines, because he sees developers who's people who can think, not folks who happen to know that arcane syntax that we call code. Although, sidebar, I wonder how many banks are seeing whether an AI can solve their COBOL programmer problem. And his other point was that this time the incumbents aren't screwed, which is very cheery to hear at 5:30 on a Thursday afternoon, I've got to say. And actually, here's where we as publishers and institutions have got a real opportunity. We've got data. We've got experts in communities who can help us build interesting things. We can navigate the connectome if we want to and pull out the good stuff and turn it into useful tools. And actually, the technology itself will help us do that. Some folks think that this latest round of AI is just another fad. Maybe it is. I don't think so. But there are folks that have got saying that it's impressive, but I can't think of a use. We've got folks saying it's all a waste of time, but we've also got the folks wondering if it can do insert thing and getting the funding to test that out. And the thing is, the naysayers said very, very similar stuff about the laser as well. Fantastic discovery with 0 practical applications. And we built modern civilization on that. So I wouldn't bet against this stuff. But what about the existential threat? So, just to point out, that's not an actual photograph. Just leave that there for a moment. I think the experts are warning us. The real experts can see just how powerful these things are going to become. But it's not about them becoming self-aware and grabbing hold of the nukes. It's about how raw power can lead to very serious and unexpected consequences. It's about forcing us to think about emergent behavior. Oppenheimer and others realized that it wasn't the neutron cascade that was the problem. It was men, then, of very limited imagination, who were seduced by the force multiplier of the A-bomb. Today, we have people like Elon Musk, smart, mad, with opinions that are deeply worrying and troubling. We have people like Mark Andreessen, he of Netscape fame, of the article Software is Eating the World, VC investor, describing the Sustainable Development Goals as, wait for this, the enemy. And there are others. Now, the good news is that some of them are about to spend a very long time in jail, But the bad news is that there's more where they came from. The experts aren't warning us about the nails, they're warning us about the people with the hammers. I was thinking about that as I watched our Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak, eagerly lapping up Mr. Musk's casual pronouncements in number 10 that AI would make everybody jobless. We need to be heavily engaged in working out what our respective principles are. And we ought to be advocating for principles that act against those with the AI hammers and the urge to hit everything. Actually, the Bletchley Park AI Summit did achieve something here, I think, a beginning. Here's a quick summary for you, and I did this, not the AI, and it took longer. 28 countries agreed that for the good of all, AI should be designed, developed, deployed, and used in a manner that is safe, in such a way as to be human-centric, trustworthy, and responsible. That they would cooperate on AI to promote inclusive economic growth, sustainable development, and innovation, protect human rights and freedoms. They would agree to foster public trust and confidence in AI systems. They also agreed that the risks are real and they need to be considered, examined, and addressed, and that proportional regulation is needed. Cooperation on common principle and code of conduct is vital, so that needs to be intensified and broadened. And that's not a bad set of principles, actually. It shouldn't be belittled, but it should also be held to account. And so we all need to be fully engaged in the debate on regulation. The EU has done some outstanding work in this area. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of it, but they got representation from world experts in all sorts of meaningful areas and have come up with what looks like a very impressive first pass of principles and frameworks. It's based on a tiered set of risks based on probability and impact if things go wrong. A key one, actually, worth calling out, is actually in the limited risk category, where, for example, the EU says that it must be very clear when users are interacting with a machine, so that they can be informed and have choice about whether to continue that interaction or not. And alongside our internal principles, we all need to have a model that regulates our use of this technology, to make sure we don't muck up our use of data, to ensure we have gone through appropriate testing and consideration on the real-world use of the tools we will use and the tools we will no doubt build. We need to build in diversity and inclusivity as part of that testing. We need to do this and other things by design. It means truly understanding the data world of our respective interests and our specialisms. I don't actually see much value in lamenting, oh, the AI, it ruins all our scholarly journals. Yes, it makes it easier for bad actors to generate bad/fake science and scholarship. But the issue is actually in our collective inability to make the penalties for being caught sufficient to demonstrate the futility of trying it in the first place. I don't know, a 4-year ban on all publications for all people associated with a rogue lab, and the striking of their research from the record would focus minds. Having to pay back their research funding would focus minds. The reputational harm for institutions in those circumstances would focus minds. But perhaps it's easier to lament the machine than the operators. But to have workable principles and to be able to contribute to appropriate regulation, even to be able to effectively leverage this technology in our work, we've got to understand what we are dealing with. I hope this talk has helped there a little bit, and as we go out and figure out how we're going to train ourselves, how we're going to train our teams, it's worth grounding ourselves in where we are and what lies ahead. And I don't think this is a bad description. The process will be long and unpredictable, an organic system of mitosis, mutation, and natural selection that we can only regard with wonder. That is the final sentence from a thoughtful article on what a future might be, speaking to us from a past century. Thanks for your time. All right, we've got a bit of time for questions. How long have we got for questions? Have we got any questions? Let's start with, have we got any questions? Oh, we've got a question.
So how far away is AGI?
So, the thing they don't have, and I think the thing everybody needs to think about, AIs don't have agency, right? That's the big differentiator, right? they can't self-motivate, they can't self-activate. If you open up GPT-4 right now, just sit there, prompt, right? Won't do anything, right? My colleague Stuart, who's not here, always remarks that when everybody's worried about the AIs going mad and grabbing the nukes, he just points to a PowerPoint with a plug in it, right? And just points out that actually you just turn the power off and they don't exist any longer. But I think what's really interesting, so they can already pass, have any of you heard of the term theory of mind tests? I see a few people nodding out there. So those are tests of reasoning and cognition. Now, we know that GPT-4 can pass theory of mind tests that it has not seen because they have not previously existed, so they've been created for the purposes of the test. So it can pass theory of mind tests to about the level of a 9-year-old. Now, what's going on there? I honestly don't know, but something interesting is going on there, right? If you start to add additional sensory input and you add in the ability of the machine to then remember its own context and its own inputs that it's received, and that's a way away right now because the requirements for memory and computation are beyond us at this moment in time, but I suspect those are the things that you might need for other interesting emergent behavior to occur, right? What's the time horizon on that? It's probably like fusion, right? It's probably like 30 years away. So, yeah. But these things are very interesting. I think when people say, oh, it's just statistics, it's not just statistics. It's not just statistics, right? Whatever it's doing on a 175 billion parameter thing or a 1.2 trillion parameter thing in GPT-4, it's not just statistics. It's something a lot more interesting than that. Anything else from anybody else? All right, well, I don't know if I've infused you, scared you, or whatever, but thanks very much, and I hope you find it useful. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks.